While I adored Resident Evil 7, it's not without narrative issues. There are plot holes and confusing story elements that deserve to be looked at analytically. For instance, the Daughters DLC blows open a giant plot hole in the way the mutamycete fungus that Eveline produces infects, controls, and spreads throughout its host. It even throws into question when and how the fungus is able to take control.
I had the weirdest dream last night. There was this little girl.
Well, now, after breakfast...
There are inconsistencies between Ethan's gradual infection and the Baker's instantaneous infections. How are Lucas and Zoe able to resist the control of Eveline for 3 long years? We will thoroughly examine all this and more, determine what's a plot hole, an inconsistency, a contradiction, or, whatever. Through the main game's memos, we are given many subtle hints that complete mind control isn't achieved until the fungus reaches the brain. That of which is considered time and time again to be a slow process. During the events of the Daughters DLC, you find that is not at all the case. The second the lights go out in the DLC, the Bakers are all in late stages of the infection, and acting like they did 3 years later. I so badly wanted to excuse this story inconsistency as kicking it into high gear for dramatic effect, but it honestly created a breach charge of a plot hole that cannot be ignored. The first evidence we have is in Marge's journal, where on the day after the DLC incident, she states, "My ears have been ringing all day and I haven't been able to sleep since the child showed up." 4 days later, she writes, "I'm seeing things, hearing things, can't stop feeling nauseous. I went to see the doctor in town and he gave me an x-ray. What's happening to me?" We can assume that it wasn't long after that she was under the complete mind control of Eveline, because 8 days later, she's talking madness. And even more madness. The letter from her doctor states, "I'm writing to tell you that I've finished examining your x-rays. Those dark areas in your cranium are fungus-like structures that seem to be related to mold. The hallucinations and noises you said you've been hearing may be related to these growths." Then the snail mail letter goes on to express the urgency in her medical condition, which assumingly never received a follow-up. By these accounts, you can theorize the late mid-stage infection took approximately 3 to 4 days. But if Marge is exhibiting this late stage of infection immediately as seen in the DLC, how is it she is able to go to the doctor without barfing up insects on everyone, and write seemingly coherent notes elaborating the progression of her illness? We'll get into that. And speaking of which, why does she suddenly have a mouthful of bugs? Where did they come from? How is it she's able to talk unmuffled while deep-throating a giant centipede?
Kiss me, lover!
Mia and Alan keep calling the mutamycete mold vomit for some reason, as it is never depicted that way.
She's vomiting far more in excess of her body mass.
But it's apparent it is secreted out of Eveline, as the report states. You'd think the crew transporting her would know the details a little better. So first, let's take a look at how the so-called mold works on infected subjects through the infection report. Initial infection. The mold ingests nutrients from the subject's body to propagate itself, and slowly takes over the cells within the body. As a side effect of this, the infected subject gains remarkable regenerative abilities. During experiments, we removed arms and legs from test subjects and found that they were able to co-opt the amputated limbs in a matter of minutes. We see this very state of initial infection with Ethan. When or how Ethan is infected is beyond me, but the time frame may very well be during the first few blackouts before the dinner scene. In case you don't know what co-opt means, it's not a word you hear too often. It means the fusion of 2 objects. For one, Ethan has the ability to co-opt his severed hand. Granted, Zoe had to staple it back on because he was still freshly infected, but he was able to use it again just fine. For 2, he was able to co-opt his severed leg, which is sliced clean off with a shovel, reattached it in seconds with a green herb mixture, and he gets right back on his feet like it was no problem. Mid-stage infection. Once the mold reaches the brain, the subject's thoughts become in tune with those of the E-Series asset. The subject starts to hear things and experience hallucinations, and soon comes under the complete control of the E-Series asset. If this state continues, the host will lose all sense of ego. From everything we've gathered so far, we can infer heavily that it only takes a few hours to gain regenerative abilities, as seen through Ethan. It takes an estimated 4 days for the mutamycete to invade the brain, leading to the mid-stage infection. We learn this through Marge's journal. We also learn that this is the beginning of the mid-stage infection, and that there are actually 3 different phases. Phase 1 starts with visual and auditory hallucinations. In Phase 2, Eveline will control the host however she pleases. This can be seen through Mia. The careful use of the word soon in the report suggests this takes some time. Phase 3 also suggests it takes some time by the use of if this state continues. However, this phase turns you into this. A complete psychopath. But the Daughters DLC contradicts all those memos of how the infection spreads. Jack and Marguerite Baker completely skip the initial infection and jump right into the late mid stages of it. For them, it's instantaneous. Also, following the progress of the main game and Ethan's infection, it's not until halfway through the game he hears an auditory hallucination of Eveline.
Stay away.
Then not long after, a visual hallucination of her among other strange happenings. We can assume Ethan has reached mid-stage infection at this point. As you progress to the climax of the game, Ethan's hallucinations become more and more intense. But Ethan never reaches the point of losing all sense of ego. This progress of infection is what I'd come to expect. In the 8 to 12 hours of being infected, he doesn't turn into the Bakers, and neither do Zoe or Lucas, who both went an absurd 3 years without going beyond mid-stage infection. And at a certain point, Ethan becomes in tune with Eveline's hallucinations and how she controls Mia, especially during the final fight with Mia. Complete infection. After every cell in the body has been taken over by the mold, the subject begins to lose their human form. Physical mutations differ from case to case, but all result in him or her acquiring incredible physical strength. This is most apparent with Jack's final form. At this stage, he has reached complete infection. It's possible the same can be said about Marge, as she has mutated long arms in a beehive where her R&D Report 1 likes to contradict everything the other memos have stated about the infection being rather slow, and totally bypasses the initial infection that gives profound regenerative abilities to say, almost immediately after infection, the subject begins to see images of Eveline and even hear her voice. But that's the mid-stage infection! The initial infection is stated to be slow in Report 2. There are literally 2 memos in the same room contradicting each other. It could be the infection varies in speed from host to host, but that's still a plot hole. But just how is Lucas able to withstand Eveline's influence? He's working with the company responsible for the incident, Tensu.
However, we did find several encrypted messages from the baker's son Lucas to an unknown third party. You can probably guess who that was.
And have been emailing them logs. We learn that he was sent a supply of suppressants to stay clear and focused, and has fooled Eveline for years that he is still under her control, citing that not only does she look like a little kid, but she's as stupid as one too. By the time we see Lucas, we can assume he's borderline mid-stage infection, as his supply of suppressants very likely got cut off at some point.
Eveline, I'm just trying to show him. Not everybody wants to go back to how things were.
But the real question is, how is Zoe able to withstand Eveline's control for so long? We find out in the last page of the R&D Report 1 that the mind has natural barriers to Eveline's brainwashing effect, which can be broken down through Eveline by forcing her subjects to self-mutilate themselves. We also witness a few times that Eveline can be resisted to some extent.
Stay away! Don't touch her! Don't hurt my family!
While it seems you need a pretty tough mind to resist the control of Eveline, Zoe exhibits that quality through her tough persona. We also find Zoe has been struggling, and it hasn't been easy for her through a memo on her camper trailer. My body's feeling weirder and weirder. Soon I'll become like mom and dad. It's all her fault. Granted, she has been in hiding for a very long time. In the main game, we get to see exactly when Mia gets infected. She is covered by mold. This is how we are to assume the actual infection occurs. When she realizes she's been infected, she rushes to record a video message to Ethan to tell him to stay away and just forget about her. Having experience with the mold firsthand, she understands that her survival is bleak.
Stay away. Forget that you ever knew me.
Not long after, she is submerged in water, unconscious. She was supposed to drown, but the infection saves her, and it's evident that Eveline had plans for her.
Can we be a family like before?
so she may have played a part in Mia's survival as well. On the other hand, Ethan is infected during one of his blackouts. But when exactly is Marge or Jack infected in the Daughters DLC? I was under the assumption from the main game that Eveline needed to cover you in mutamycete secretions in order to infect you. But that is not at all the case with the DLC. They seem normal, then they aren't. There's no evidence of the mold anywhere around the infected bakers, nor any presence of Eveline. They immediately go into the late mid stages of infection, losing their senses of ego, which has been stated time and time again to be a slow process. Then, we cannot forget, in the Daughters DLC, there is the scene of the next morning where everyone is right back to normal, having forgotten everything that happened during the prior night. Could the explanation of Marge's doctor visits and coherent journal entries be because the infection only takes hold at night? The ending of the Daughters DLC makes it very clear. The nights are marked by the family's murderous feasts. This explains away the journal and letter, but why only at night? I was wrong in my previous video about there being a loading screen message that explains molded are affected by light. That's not mentioned in the game anywhere. But still, could it be that light or even sunlight affects Eveline's control? And if so, why isn't any of this vital information ever mentioned in the R&D report? You'd think Eveline's mutamycete's weakness to light would be something worth documenting. The R&D report seems to leave out the fact that before infection, Eveline is able to teleport and or screw with Mia's electronic wrist device. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it's possibly just for the creep factor. Just check this out. On top of that, the R&D report also seems to leave out the fact that Eveline is able to control a slithering worm-like mutamycete organism, the one seen during the scene on the boat just in time to capsize it for dramatic effect, and also seen to whisk Ethan away for dramatic effect. While not explained anywhere else in the game either, this isn't necessarily a plot hole or anything, as this is an ability that could have been developed over time. But it sure is a convenient ability for significant plot purposes, am I right? There are definitely contradictions when it comes to dates as well. In a newspaper article, it describes the Sewer Gators team having gone missing on the 9th of July. But as we can gather from the date stamp on some of the videotapes, they enter the house and Clancy gets kidnapped by Jack on June 1st. Shortly after that, he is taken in by Marge and fed some nasty soup and stew. Then, on June 2nd, he is kidnapped by Lucas, presumably after his grand escape. Clancy then fails Lucas's rigged-to-lose mind game puzzle and burns to death. He looks dead to me. His corpse is even shown. But wait a second! On June 3rd, he is subjected to a life-or-death roulette Saw movie-like version of blackjack, completely unscathed, which makes no sense. But the newspaper details they went missing on the 9th, when they went missing on the 1st. The newspaper even seems to assert that the 9th was the exact date they left to Dulvey. So, as you can see, some key writers weren't keeping very good notes of dates. And hell, as you can tell by now, it wasn't just dates they weren't keeping good track of. Okay, to recap everything so far, my previous video explained a minor contradiction stating the E-series was perfected, when I proved it certainly wasn't perfect by any means. The mind control apparently only takes place at night, with no real explanation in the game or R&D reports where you think something like that would be mentioned. This creates a plot hole. There's much insinuation that the late mid-stage infection is a slow process, while an article explains the early mid-stage infection is instantaneous, and the Daughters DLC shows that the late mid-stage infection is also instantaneous. This is not only a contradiction, but a plot hole as well. Infection of the mutamycete fungus is shown as enveloping the host first, as with Mia, but in Daughters, there's no presence of Eveline or her mold. What's up with the teleportation and or ability to screw with the electronic wrist device? Also, the VHS tapes and the newspaper report inconsistent dates that make absolutely no sense. So, as you can see, the story isn't without flaws, plot holes, and inconsistencies. But as you play, you really turn a blind eye to everything, as the unknowing, horrifying experience is just that immersive. I'm sure there's plenty more inconsistencies I didn't even touch on, but these are the worst offenders. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and possibly become a patron to help me continue making these videos. I absolutely need to thank all these fine young cannibals who pledged to me monthly on Patreon. A special shout out to the following new patrons: Michael, Josh TMZ, man, this name, Jurcha S. Vitarsson, Born to Die 3, and Big Al. And a super special shout out to the following patrons:
The legendary Chris, GSXP, Jay, and Michael. The heroic Tyler Hunter and Jack Bristow. The elite Andreas Birnbaumer, Alex Loop, Jonathan Ryan, Swifty, Sigma Undine Goodnight, Josh TMZ, Piotr Svitarshan, and Born to Die 3.
Thanks again. Subscribe, become a patron, or watch my other Resident Evil 7 videos for more entertainment, such as my last one with Eveline. Stay tuned for more on Dark Souls 3's DLC.